Coburn, Senator, it's a pleasure to have you. What's the sort of your highest expectation from this evening?
Well, I think tone is important. I would hope that the president will explain and lay out to the American people how severe our problems are, how urgent they are, and I would hope, although it's not sounding, that we're going to get the kind of leadership that we need to solve the problems.
And how would you define that leadership?
Willing to be honest with it, that we've doubled the size of the federal government over the last 10 years, that we can't afford the federal government that we have. A freeze for 5 years on where we are today, it won't go anywhere close to solving our problems. We need to go back by about $200 or $300 billion in discretionary and defense spending per year, and get our house in order so that we can, in fact, grow the economy and also be able to afford the debt that we have right now.
How do we create the necessary incentives to drive the growth we're going to need? You and I both know you can cut, and not that there's not lots of cutting to be done, and that it shouldn't be widely debated and done, but ultimately it will be a dynamic growth period that will bring this country to prosperity. What policies do you see that would be necessary to drive that?
Well, I agree partially with you, Dylan. There's no way we can grow out of the problem that we're in. It's impossible. We would have to be at like 14 or 15% annualized growth over the next 20 years to get out of the problem we're in. So it can't just be growth. It has to be reform of health care. Our biggest problem is health care is going to continue to take a larger and larger percentage of our GDP, even with Obamacare, because we haven't attacked the real problem, and the real problem is it costs too much. It costs twice here what it should cost. So that's one. The other is we need to eliminate the territorial tax system, where we're actually dissuading corporations around the world, including ours, from investing here. So that's one thing we need to do. We need to change the corporate tax structure. We need to change and flatten the rates in this country and eliminate a lot of the tax credits over a period of time, so we don't interfere in the economy with the allocation of capital. We're directing capital based on what the tax credits are, rather than what's the best place to put capital that'll actually create prosperity and jobs. So I think it's a combination of all of those. We have no area in the country that the federal government runs, not one single area that is both efficient and effective. And we have duplications like crazy throughout the federal government. And to take the time, if you'll give me the time, I'll explain some of that. We have 105 education programs for science, education, technology, and math, engineering and math. We have 67 job training programs we spend $30 billion a year on through 9 different agencies. None of them have a metric. We have 30 programs for childhood obesity. 30 right now. None of them have a metrics. We've got 30 sets of bureaucrats, and I can go on and on. There's 650 sets of duplications, just like the ones I just mentioned to you, that nobody's looking at. Well, those count up to billions, billions, and billions and billions, probably close to 80 or 90 billion dollars a year if we just eliminate the duplication. If you take the fraud out of Medicare, which I met with people today trying to get the CMS to respond to get the fraud out, which is 80 to 90 billion dollars a year. So it's not that we can't do it, it's that we aren't doing it. And we need leadership to say, we have to start doing the things. We have to gore some people's oxes, including mine, things that I might think we shouldn't do, if we're going to solve this problem. And we can't just grow out of it.
How big is the gap between the rhetoric that you just offered up here on television about duplication? I won't repeat what you just said, but how big is the chasm between your rhetoric and Republican leadership, your rhetoric and Democratic leadership, your rhetoric and the White House?
Well, I think I don't think the gap is not that big. The fact is people aren't aware. I mean, last year I had 3 instances of committee hearings that I was working on bills that I was trying to stop bills that people were offering to solve problems, when we already had government agencies that were responsible to do exactly the same thing that the bill offered. So what you're really saying is that the members of Congress aren't aware of what the government's doing now, so we continue to borrow money that we don't have to spend on things that either we don't need or we're already spending money on that we don't have good results from. So it's a matter of educating and people digging in and say, we got a problem in this country. We're going to work together to solve the problem. But the first thing you got to do is know the facts about where the government's spending its money.
I mean, would it be?
And I tell you, the vast majority of people in the Congress don't know where the government's spending their money.
Would it be possible for a man like yourself, maybe to get together with your State of the Union date this evening, Chuck Schumer, put together a piece of legislation that just addresses duplication? I mean, could you actually just go at this legislatively with your leadership?
Well, we do, but the problem is this cuts across all the committees. So what we need is a group of people, which we're working. Saxby Chambliss and Mark Warner are putting together a group to try to put forward some of the findings of the Deficit Commission, of which many of those I offered in the Deficit Commission. You know, there's $50 billion worth of waste a year in the Pentagon, and we need to go get it. And we need to make sure they understand that there's no longer a free ride. You have to justify everything that you're doing, and it has to be done on a cost-effective basis.
What's the subject of conversation going to be with Chuck Schumer tonight between listening?
Whether I've got some double-sided tape to keep him in a seat so he doesn't stand up all the time.
If you were to look at sort of the refinement of the message here on this show, as we're on the eve of the Steel on Wheels tour, as you know, we partnered with Nucor Steel and Dan D'Amico, the largest steel company in America, really just to drive a message that goes towards the tax fairness you were just suggesting, that goes towards trade fairness, that goes towards reducing the health care costs. We're at the Mayo Clinic tomorrow. I was sitting with the CEO of the Mayo Clinic yesterday or 2 days ago. I said, what's the big deal around here? We'll get into this on tomorrow's show. He said, it's not that big of a deal. We just have teams of doctors that work on salary trying to heal patients. So the whole fee-for-service thing is taken out of it, and they just work as a crew to heal people. Is that such an insane concept?
No, it's not. But the one thing, we'll never control healthcare costs. Never control them until the person purchasing the healthcare has a large involvement in the payment for that healthcare. We have disconnected the ability. You know, everybody thinks somebody else is paying for their healthcare. And when you take all market forces away, which we have, except in those areas that aren't covered by insurance, and now you're really seeing you're seeing price declines, you're seeing innovation in delivery in those areas on things that are not covered by insurance. But everything else, the great example is the Amish. You know, I've delivered about 400 or 500 Amish babies. And every one of those were very consistent in how they approached the cost of health care. They wanted to know what the best price. Every time a test was ordered, they wanted to make sure they knew why the test was ordered and whether it was necessary. Every time they wanted to know where they could get the test done the cheapest. And every one of those deliveries were paid for in advance at a 60% discount at the hospital that I delivered.
Yeah.
So markets work in terms of allocating scarce resources, and we've refused to embrace what built this country, which is market forces allocating scarce resources so capital flows where it can get the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people.
Amen. Enjoy your evening. We look forward to talking to you on the other side of this. Thank you. All right, thanks.
See you, Dylan.
You as well. Coming up on the Dylan Ratigan Show, the Pentagon, surprise, surprise, on the defense. What the military said